Thank you very much, Professor Smith, Vernon. Thank you. It's been a great lecture. We have something special that we wanted to do today. We did get permission from Kyiv School of Economics to do this today. You know, what changes the economy? What changes the economy is people, individuals, young people. And when Vernon and I came and we started giving lectures in Ukraine, one of the things that we said that we wanted, first of all, we wanted to invest and spend time with students. In fact, we prefer that more than meeting government officials and prime ministers and ministers and parliamentary people, because it's really hard to change the system that already exists. But what we can change is the future generation. And so as a part of this, we actually invited, with an effort of Alumni Fund of Ukraine, young economists, the young generation. And so we have representatives here. So these young people are sitting here in the front row, and they have been successful. They've done really well at the Olympiads and competitions that we have here in Ukraine. And so we actually want to recognize them here, and Vernon Smith and I, we prepared, together with the Alumni Fund of Ukraine, diplomas for them. They didn't know this is coming. So this is all expromtum and surprise for them. But first of all, we would like to thank Pani Nadia Zahun, because she's the one who prepared these young people for the Olympiad and to be good economists. So, Professor Smith, would you do me an honor and sign this for Pani Nadia? If we can keep this on the record and maybe take some snapshots and pictures. This is, again, I know you didn't expect this, but that's fine. This is exactly what we do. We surprise. You already know that there are a lot of surprises in economics, as we already learned this. So, Vernon, would you do an honor?
Yeah.
Pani Nadia, Pastor. Okay, thank you very much. We'll have an opportunity to take more pictures as we go. Now we would...
Продовжують навчатися. Сподіваюся, що це також наступні ваші студенти.
Дякую, дякую. She hopes that this is your future students as well. Okay. Now we want to recognize Victoria Ostapenko. She actually is one of the winners of the the Olympiad for the Young Economists. So, would you give us an honor to come here? Congratulations as well from me and from the Alumni Fund of Ukraine. And last but not the least, Volodymyr Ilkiv. He actually is from Physical-Technical Lycée from Kyiv.
Yes.
This is my alma mater. I studied there, so this is a very special place. In fact, the things that I have learned there helped me to get good grades on GRE and get into graduate school in the United States. So this is a special place for me. So Volodymyr, this is for you. And congratulations, and change the economy of Ukraine, okay?
Please.
Again, thank you very much. How much time do we have?
I think we have half an hour. Yeah,
We will have some questions. So we will have Q&As, but now we will be more informal. We really wanted to finish this up first, and I'll take a seat as well. And if you have questions, we are more than happy to take them. Thank you very much.
So who already has questions for our guests over here? Well, I might start with a question that I have. I've been actually thinking about that during both presentations that you gave. Roman, you mentioned Weber and his seminal book, The Origins of the Protestant Ethics and the Origins of Capitalism. And that gets me back to the issue of experimental economy. is there cultural bias in the results that you are getting? If you repeat the same experiment in a different cultural context, would you get the same results? How culture specific are the results that you are getting in your experiments?
Well, so first of all, these are empirical data. So this is the empirical data, and most of these studies are not experiments, but actually the real data that comes from Gutenberg and other cities, and done by very prominent economists, Woosman and Becker and others, and Rubin, that just been published, the book by Cambridge Press. And I mean, they just do instrumental variables, you know, fairly good instrumental variables when they show that it was Protestant Reformation that did cause economic growth in Europe. So it's the instruments, it's not the specific experiments that run in a specific culture. So I'm not sure how to answer this question because it's an empirical fact or statistics or data, and most economists, the very well-respected economists, would agree with that. We could debate the mechanisms through which this shift has happened, and I think that's exactly what we do in the book. We're suggesting some, you know, but the actual shift, I mean, it exists. So I don't know, maybe you can clarify a little bit your question so I can know exactly how. Do I think that this is a culturally specific? I mean, no, I think if you were to do a similar experiment, because it's an empirical study, I think you would probably get the same results. But of course, we don't have another example of a Protestant Reformation in the world. What we do observe, actually,
I'll just specify straight away. I didn't mean this specific case of
She's talking about the lab experiment.
About the lab experiment.
Oh, but because
She's
yeah, I'm
speaking
sorry.
English.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
understand English.
That I missed the question. I'm sorry.
Well, early on, we were curious about whether the supply and demand experiments would work with non-student populations, and we use small businessmen and women, members of local Kiwanis clubs, which tend to be in the United States business, and professional people. I use teachers in high school subjects, corporate executives. Eventually, over the years, ran it with all kinds of people. Those results were extremely robust and convergence tendencies. Those experiments have been done. Were very early done in the old Soviet Union, in China and other places. Chinese can find the equilibrium. The Russians can find the equilibrium. Anybody can find the equilibrium. And there's no reason why they couldn't all be equally productive in economic systems if you just give them incentives and let people do their thing. And now also the asset market. You see, there I thought those might be a little more likely due to the subject, but no, wasn't true. Corporate executives, small business people, kept doing them with different people, always would get these inexperienced subjects giving us a bubble. Hope springs eternal. Then you can make money by buying low and selling high, you see. So people are in there, you know. And out of frustration, I went to Chicago. I had a friend there who recruited some over-the-counter stock market traders. These are professionals, you know. And we got, it wasn't an experimental lab, but there was a statistical lab that had machines in it, and we put our software on those machines, recruited those guys in there, and they gave us a bubble. So I can pretty well forecast that if for the first-time subjects in that experiment, no matter where they're coming from, we're going to bubble. Now, graduate students, we used to do these, we did workshops for students, for graduate students. And we quit doing the asset market experiments because they didn't bubble. The first, a few did, occasionally we would get it, but it was.
І один доїздить. Роман Шермета, Case Western University, United States. Він буде говорити про сучасні методи економічного аналізу. І хвилин за 20 до нас приєднається професор Вернон Сміт, який буде говорити про експерименти в економіці, можливість експериментів в економіці. Тому порядок денний нашої сьогоднішньої зустрічі такий, що у нас буде дві послідовні лекції Романа і професора Сміта, і після цього у нас буде Q&A session, де ви зможете поставити ваші запитання до наших доповідачів. Прошу.
Дуже дякую. Мені дуже приємно бути тут, тому я знаю, що Київська школа економіки – це є особливе поєднання найкращих розумів України, і мені дуже приємно тут бути. Я хотів у вас запитати, чи як буде краще? Should I speak English or should I speak Ukrainian? How about I have the slides in Ukrainian, but I'll speak in English? Sounds good? Excellent. That's wonderful. Also, I have a question. There should be 3 special people that came here from Ivano-Frankivsk. Is there? So this is gonna be our guest. And
Ні, ми черкаські.
прошу.
Ми черкаські.
Черкаський, да? But you, okay.
На запрошення Надії Верховної.
Надія Варгола, дуже приємно. We have an initiative from all of the, some of the graduate students that have graduated from Ukraine, and we have created an alumni fund of Ukraine. And the idea is to sponsor and to support students, professors, teachers, and different institutions. So far we have 3 of them, including Kyiv-Mohyla Academy and a couple local institutions in Ivano-Frankivsk and in Cherkasy that we support, and we have many people that have joined this project, and so I'm really grateful that you could be here, guys. Now, going to the lecture that we're gonna, what we're gonna talk about today, we're gonna talk about the modern methods of economic research. Maybe it's too loud of a thing to say modern methods, but I know that in Ukraine sometimes things are kind of lagging, and so the methods that are not modern anymore in the US are still modern here. So I think that's going to be fine. I know that maybe this is too much of a detail, but if you think about what is economic science, and it's a study of human choice, how people make decisions when they're faced with the problem of scarcity. We have constraints, and we study how people make decisions. So that's in general what the economics as a science is. Overall, what we as economists, we study causal inferences, right? We try to figure out, in Ukrainian, причинно-наслідкові зв'язки. Not the correlation, не кореляцію, but specifically причинно-наслідкові or causal relationships. So I have an example, озеро Морозово, я називаю його, the ice cream in a lake. So you could potentially put the correlation that the more ice cream people eat, the more drowning there is. So they drown in a lake. And you would say, well, that's stupid, right? It doesn't make any sense. But there is that correlation. And you could potentially jump into conclusion trying to draw a causal relationship there, but that would be wrong. For a very simple reason, because both you eat more ice cream and you swim more in the lake in the summer. And so summer is that hidden factor that basically prohibits us to find the real cause for that relationship. And so economics, as economists, we are very careful about drawing these kind of conclusions. And so what we use theoretical methods to draw these kind of causal relationships. And then we also use econometrics, statistics. And finally, this is what Vernon Smith came in, our next speaker, who won the Nobel Prize in 2002 for developing the methods of experimental economics. So we actually use experiments to study causal pathways. Now, I'm going to quickly give you an example here. So let's say you hear the following statistics, which is true, by the way. This is a true statistics about the United States. that for every additional year of study, a person in the United States, a student in the United States, gets $4,000 more per year. So if you go to school for 5 years, that's $20,000 that you make, additional every year throughout your whole life. So the conclusion that you may jump into, you could say, well, education leads to higher income. Okay, that sounds kind of reasonable, right, given the statistics. But here's another conclusion that as well could be true. And that conclusion is that people go to study into university, and people who go to study into the university are smart people to begin with. So maybe it's the fact that they are smart that eventually leads to higher income. It's not that education does anything good to them. And so if that's the case, then you should not study in Kyiv School of Economics. Now if one is true, then you probably should. Now, how do we find out which one is true? Well, that's how we do research. We have theory, we have empirics, we have experimental. Oh, by the way, I'm going to introduce Vernon Smith. He is going to come here. As a good thing, we don't have to have translation, so I'm speaking in English.
Very good.
And you're going to follow right after that. I'm going to do a good introduction, I promise.
Okay. All right.
So again, this is how we do research. We do theory, we do empirical studies, econometrics, and let me just cover these couple methods, and then we will. I'll tell you a little bit about my experiments, and then we're gonna move to the main presentation to Professor Smith. Now, how do we do theoretical research? We start with assumptions. Then after that, we do theoretical analysis. And we can use general equilibrium, game theory, agent-based modeling, whatever your preference, and then you make a prediction, or comparative statics prediction. Now, probably two most famous people here are Paul Samuelson and John Nash. John Nash is obviously, if you've seen the movie Beautiful Mind, Igre Razuma, this is the movie that basically tells the life of John Nash, and he developed game theory, for which he got Nobel Prize in 1994, I believe. So some of the theoretical predictions or models that we know is, for example, supply and demand, right? There is a contest model, or maybe a principal agent model, or maybe it's a mechanism design or auction theory. By the way, you're going to have, I believe in 3 weeks, you're going to have another very famous man, economist, Roger Myerson, and he actually got the Nobel Prize for this part here, for the mechanism design. Now, obviously, you've seen, if you haven't seen this graph of supply and demand, you probably should not be in this school. Okay? But I believe you all saw this, and obviously there is a prediction how the demand, what happens when the price goes up and the quantity moves. You know that the law of supply, law of demand, again, that's a model. That's a theoretical construct. Another one is the model of contest. When you have a bid function here that depends, it's a best response to another person's bid. So again, there is a relationship there as well. And there is comparative statics predictions. I'm not going to go through the details. Obviously, we can solve this model together. But in this case, I just want to show you some examples. Now, there are problems with the theoretical models. I love this picture. You see that there's a squiggles here, some theoretical results. There is some theoretical consequences or predictions. And then in the middle, then a miracle happens, right? So sometimes, that's how we do the theory, but the point is that very often the theory has unrealistic assumptions. And actually, that's something that can lead us to the wrong conclusions. There is also, sometimes it's too complicated to do a proper analysis. You may not find the unique Nash equilibrium, or you cannot find the general equilibrium. And so anyway, multiple equilibria. So again, that's another thing. And then maybe sometimes there are unrealistic even predictions. Or if you use topology, topological predictions are fairly limited in their applications. So this is the problem with the theoretical methods. Now, for that we have empirical methods. Okay, we have econometrics, we have statistics. There we do research a little bit different. We start with a hypothesis, then we collect the data, and after that we do the analysis. Now it's important that since as economists, we really look at causal pathways, right? Causal relationships, that we don't just look at the correlation. Because correlation doesn't mean causation, right? There is a Ozoro Morozo example, right? We already talked about this. And so we need to do more in-depth analysis. We need to use instrumental variables, difference and difference, and many more methods that would basically give us these causal inferences. Some examples or some questions that we may be interested in: how does education impact the salary or income? Or how does religion relate to the welfare of a nation? Is there such a relationship to begin with? Or how does inflation and unemployment relate? Or how does debt impact economic growth? Is there a relationship like that? So these are all economic type of questions that we study using empirical econometric methods. Just giving you some examples here. So what do we know about education? Well, from studies, tons of studies actually, we know that if you get more education, you are expected to get $4,000 more for every year of additional year of education. I already gave you that statistics. Another one is education leads to higher productivity of labor. Another one is that education leads to innovation. Another one is that if you are more educated, it's more likely that you will have better health outcomes. You actually will live longer because of the choices that you're going to make. There's also, you're going to have a better family, and you're going to be a better parent. So these are all empirical facts about education causing these specific consequences. And there are also behavioral factors. I'm actually a behavioral economist. I do some theory, but I'm first of all an experimental economist. And so what we find is that education does impact a lot of behavioral elements of the way that people behave. So you may even not think about this, but education has a lot of good stuff that it brings to the society, and that's why we subsidize education in the first place. We help people to get education because besides giving the people additional income, it brings all this goodness to the economy. Now, one more example, and that is the relationship between religion and society, or the principles on which the religion is based. And you'd be surprised, but actually there is quite a difference. If you plot, different societies by their religious identification, there's going to be quite a difference. And actually, Professor Smith, Vernon and I, and we have another editor of the book here, we wrote a book on the Protestant Reformation and how it impacted Europe and what are the consequences, or what are the rules, or what are the lessons for Ukraine. You'll have a chance to buy it today, and we are more than happy to sign it for you. We would give you for free, but as you know, nothing is free, right, in economics. So we need to at least somehow recoup all the costs that are related with the trips that we've been making. But anyway, there is that relationship, and I'm not going to talk much about it, but there is a lot of empirical studies that show that Protestant Reformation had an impact on the growth of the Western Europe, on the economies of the Western Europe. And we talk about all of these causal pathways, because that's what economics is all about. We study the causal pathways, because it's not that, by no means we want to make a claim that Protestantism is the solution to the world problems. What we want to say is that there are some things that have been hidden in the process of Reformation, in the Protestants' ethic. That's Max Weber. He had his theory of, and he wrote a famous book that became a classic. But anyway, there's a bunch of factors that have led to the development of the Western Europe. So again, there is this causal relationship. If you want to know more, we are more than happy for you to have the book, and you can acquaint yourself with that. Now, obviously, there are problems with the empirical method as well. For example, it's sometimes very hard to get the data. And in Ukraine, I know that's specifically a big problem. Because I'm not even sure that you could agree on how to estimate the GDP of Ukraine. I mean, I'm sure if you give me the way if you present to me the data, how you estimated GDP, we can have a long debate whether it's a correct estimation or not. So it's important to get the data, and sometimes we don't get the data. Also, besides that, I already pointed out that there is a difference between correlation and causation. Or basically, it's really difficult sometimes to draw the conclusion that from this relationship, it has to be that X is causing Y. Okay, so that's the problem. And as a solution, thanks to Vernon Smith, we have a quite impressive method that we can do research, and that's called experimental method. For this method, Vernon Smith has received a Nobel Prize. He was honored with a Nobel Prize in 2002. The first experiment, if I believe, Vernon, you ran in 1955, is that right?
In 1955, January.
January 1955. And when was it published? Do you remember?
In the JPE in 1962. That and many experiments
So
that followed.
in Journal of Political Economy in 1962, 7 years later. This is, by the way, a very big problem for our discipline in general. When we write our papers, they get published sometimes 6, 7 years later, right? And this is something, you know, that is common to economics. Anyway, so this is, what's the core of this method? It's similar to empirical method, but there's one big difference. You start with a hypothesis or a theory that you have in mind, but then instead of getting the data from the web or from whatever you want to get data, you plan an experiment. You decide how to randomize your treatments, you decide what kind of treatments to run, you decide on the procedures, you decide whether you want to do a laboratory or a field experiment. But again, you make these decisions, you invite people to the laboratory, if you decide on a laboratory experiment, and then you change one thing at a time. Only one thing. A specific rule. Let's increase the rate of inflation. Or let's change this parameter. And then you know for a fact that it was this parameter that led to specific changes, because you control the whole environment. There's no external factors that have influenced this conclusion. And you have used a proper randomization, so you get exactly the data that you want. And after that, you do the analysis. You can do non-parametric tests, you can again do all the statistics that you used to. Some examples, and this is not limited, of course, you think about auctions. Behavior in auctions, you can think about how to stimulate a specific type of behavior or incentives. Right? We study how incentives impact human behavior, trust, contracts, different social preferences. Maybe you want to study contests, tournaments, whatever you want, you can study using experimental methods. Now I just want to say briefly what kind of things that I've been interested in. By the way, that looks like me when I wake up in the morning. The results, some of the things that I've been studying over the years, I'm really interested in the question of why are people competitive. I mean, I used to be a chess player before I became an economist. Actually, I used to be a chess player, a swimmer, I went to the law school, I failed in all of them, and I actually even was a musician. I failed there as well, so I became an economist. So the lesson for you, if you fail in life and everything, there's always a chance you can become an economist, okay guys? But anyway, as an economist, as a behavioral economist, I've studied why people are competitive, why they fight, how to resolve conflicts. I've studied, how to use contests and tournaments to motivate workers at the workplace. I've studied how to encourage donors to give more to different charities. Okay, I'm just going to give you this example quickly, and then we're almost at the end of this lecture. We had this idea, well, we want to raise more money for a specific charity. In our example, it was Red Cross. And then parents came to the kindergarten to pick up their children. And then as they were sitting in a room waiting for their children, we came to them and we gave them envelopes, and we said, how much money would you like to donate to the Red Cross? Just put the amount into the envelope, and they put that amount, and then we said, and by the way, we're going to write down how much money we collected from each person. That's all we're going to write down. So people gave, $2, $3, $5, different amounts. And we did this 10 different times. And then we had another group that would come in, and we changed a rule. Only one rule. You would donate money, but we would write the name on an envelope. And so we would then put the name next to the donation. So now I would know that Vernon has given $10 and Roman gave only $1. So then, you know, that, as you can imagine, it motivated people to give more. And so we didn't stop there. We decided, can we do even better? So what we did, we said, you donate money, we're going to write the name on envelopes, but then on the board, so that everybody, so that everybody would see, we would put the 2 highest donors, and we would write down that this person gave $100 and this person gave $50. And then, гуляй душа. People start giving 50, 100, and big amounts of money, you know, because it created an incentive, a competition to be seen as generous. I mean, you'll be surprised, but a lot of giving is actually selfish. That's what we learned from these experiments. People give for selfish reasons. And so that really motivated, and we got the most money from that mechanism. There was one last mechanism that worked really well. When we displayed the bottom 2. So imagine you give money, and when we're saying, this person gave 0 and this person gave 0. Well, when we implemented the system, nobody gave zeros. So people were giving a lot of money, and so we collected as much money as the top 2. But the problem with implementing this kind of shameful experience or shameful treatment is that if you knew in the first place that your name could be as the bottom 2, you would never even participate. You would say, I'll never go to that kindergarten again. They put my name on the wall of shame, so that's it, you know? So obviously there are a lot of things that we have to think through even when we recommend specific policy implications based on our research. But nonetheless, we learned a lot from these experiments, and so we, you know, made some policy recommendations. So that's how you do experiments, and obviously Vernon is going to give you 2 famous examples of his own that actually changed the way that even economic theory works today. Now, just the last thing that I want to say is that where are we heading? You know, what are what are the forefront of economic research? Well, some cool things are obviously happening in experimental economics is that we are doing research outside the lab today, which is pretty interesting research as well. We call it field experiments. And where economists see the whole world as a big experiment, as a big laboratory. You find environments in the world where you can manipulate, you know, some things, and sometimes you can make a deal with the firm and say, hey, we believe we can help your firm to improve your business. Just give us an opportunity to run a very small experiment. And we'll test certain things, and if they work, you can implement and it will profit your business. And other examples, but the field experiments are growing, of course. There is also very interesting research about the biology of economic decision making. So there's a lot of good models that are coming from evolutionary biology that actually can do much better at explaining human behavior than we economists can do. And there's obviously this cool new field called neuroeconomics. When you put people into MRI machine, you scan their brain. As you scan the brain, you ask them to make certain economic decisions. And so you actually see how the brain reacts as you make specific decisions. And that's called neuroeconomics, a big growing field. If you want to be publishing in Nature and Science, that's probably where you should do those kind of experiments. And obviously the big data analysis, that's a big thing everywhere. You know, we want to know how to analyze big data, and we want to, that's something that is important. Well, I'm done here. That was the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. What we will do next, I'll invite Professor Vernon Smith to give his presentation, and then afterwards, obviously, we will have Q&A. You can address either my presentation or Vernon's. And do you have your presentation?
Yes.
We'll need to put them on.
Okay. It's Ukraine 3.
Okay.
It's a very
Can you
sophisticated.
ask? What is Ukraine
Do you want to sit or do you want to stand?
No, I'll stand.
Okay. So.
Yeah, keep the chair handy in case I change my mind.
See if you want some water. Just, yes. By the way, I just want to say one thing about Vernon. Besides that, he is absolutely a fantastic person to get to know. He is a very dedicated person. I'll tell you one story. I told it a couple times already, but you know the people who've been following with us, they kind of, oh, not again. You know, but this is the story. On Saturday morning in Chapman University, when I was working at the ESI, I come to the office at 6 a.m. because I really need to prepare for the next experiment on Monday, so I'm working early, and I'm thinking, there's no way there's anybody in the office at this time. And sure, there's nobody there, everybody is asleep, there's not a single worker. There was one office that was open, that was yours. Vernon was working at 6 a.m., and he just turned 90 years old, so he's going for his 91st year. So give a hand of applause to our dear friend, Vernon Smith.
Well, this talk involves two of the three sets of experiments that and where I was most dramatically wrong in terms of what I expected to happen. But I wasn't alone. Lots of economists, in fact, most economists were wrong. And so they're good examples to show how experiments can actually impact your own beliefs. And I think another lesson here is that it's important to be open to proving yourself wrong, because you really learn a lot when you find that you're wrong. And the easiest thing in the world is not to face up to your wrong, to find a way to, to excuse it. And that's a problem not just in economics, it's a problem of all sciences, is a process whereby, evidence changes beliefs. It took decades for the theory of relativity to overcome the Newtonian physicists' commitment to the Newtonian system. And it took even longer for quantum mechanics, which had its start in 1905, the same year that Einstein published the special theory of relativity. He published a paper called the photoelectric effect, which jump-started the field of quantum mechanics. If you read that history, it's a long struggle with scientists overcoming their previous beliefs. And mostly, the way it's overcome is that the old guys die and the young guys take over. And they are not prejudiced against the new. That's the fundamental process whereby it operates. So the theme here is that widely held beliefs can be wrong, and experiments may gradually enable false beliefs to be changed. And two beliefs. Now, the first one has to do with participants. What sort of knowledge do the participants in a market have in order for that market to be efficient and competitive? Now, the claim that market equilibrium was unattainable unless people had perfect or complete knowledge of supply and demand has its origin in William Stanley Jevons, who was part of the neoclassical revolution in economics. And that revolution centrally involved utility theory, and kind of a really important discovery, and that is the important role that marginal utility had in relations to prices. The classics were not entirely clear on that, and you see some confusion. But that doesn't mean they got everything wrong. okay, just because they got that wrong. And that's going to be part of this. Let's look at, and I'll come back to that at the end, but let's look at case 2. How are durables different? Well, and it's durable retradable goods that we're involved in when I talk about case 2 here. The false belief that if asset value is known, price bubbles will not occur. So we created complete information markets. I'll show you one. And the idea is we wanted to study bubbles. So let's begin with a baseline that doesn't bubble. So we'll give everybody complete, perfect information. Try to be very sure they understand what that is. And then we're going to try to produce bubbles after that. But the first lesson was our own ignorance, and that is the baseline bubble. So we were already getting bubbles where we didn't expect to get them. And here was the environment we looked at. Fundamental value is declining because we're using up draws from a yield distribution that's paid to the asset holdings that people have. So the expected one period yield value of the asset, we call it the dividend, is 24 cents. So 24 times 15 means it begins worth 360 because in the first period of trading you're looking forward to 15 draws, a right to 15 draws with each share you have. And then as you use up draws, it goes down in value. Well, here's an inexperienced group. These are the mean prices, double auction trading, the mean prices. You get this massive bubble and then collapse, and at the end it's trading at 24 cents. Okay, fundamental value. We bring that same group back, same parameters, and they start higher. They go as high, but they bubble earlier and collapse sooner. Overshoot and come in and trade at 24 cents at the right. We bring them a third time back, and here they are trading much closer. And moreover, not shown here is each of these mean prices is a high volume of trade. Volume is lower when they're brought back, and it's very, very thin. The trading is very thin. These are 1 or 2 units typically that they're trading, and sometimes they trade no. Given a period, they trade nothing. Okay, how do these two kinds of market experiments relate to the economy and its sources of instability? What have we learned? Well, markets tend strongly to be stable if items can't be retraded. With retrade arises a tension between market value and consumption yield value. Okay? So you buy a house, you're buying 100 years of shelter services. Okay? Of rental value. But particularly because it's credit finance, it's possible for the market value of those houses to get out of line with the use value. And when there's a gap like that, you can easily have a bubble. Even though it's not sustainable, it can continue as long as there's a flow of credit, mortgage credit. Okay, now the identification of these two kinds of markets, in particular, the first kind, it helps you to understand why transportation was such a great success, deregulation success in the United States. It started with Jimmy Carter in the 1970s, and we first deregulated airlines, then trucks, then railroads. Everybody looks back on that, no matter what their political persuasion. It's an enormous success. Notice, those commodities can't be retraded. Those are services. When you get to, you're consuming it right as you use it and pay for it. Okay, and people don't buy those to resell to somebody else to consume. And then I won't go into this, but we also moved into financial mortgage market deregulation, and that is seen as much less successful. Well, that's a harder problem. It's harder to get the property rights correct on things that can be retraded. I think Adam Smith had the right intuition in the Wealth of Nations. He discussed the South Sea land bubble. He said, too much of other people's money. And that's exactly the problem in the mortgage market. You're buying them mostly with credit. All right, now here's about 80 or 90 years of GDP. And so here's, and all of the recessions are shown here as gray bars. And they're little ripples. See, most of them are just little ripples in GDP. The thing that's a rock, the flywheel that gives all this its stability is C, which is household consumption of non-durable goods and service. That's over 2/3 of GDP. Okay, so what stability that has is coming from this. Look at housing, highly volatile. Okay, and durables have more volatility also, but this is durables plus housing expenditures. Okay, let me go. I've got limited time here, so the conclusions. Supply and demand for non-durables with strictly private values converge to efficient equilibrium outcomes. Price discovery is bottom-up, trial and error process over time. In the economy, non-durables are also a comparable rock of dependable stability. Prices in markets for retraded assets show tendencies to bubble relative to fundamental value. These results helped us to see how the house market, mortgage markets, houses bought with mortgage could contribute repeatedly and to economic instability. And that instability comes through that entire period, beginning back in the 20s, leading up to the Great Depression. The neoclassical marginal revolution, too eagerly abandoned process for equilibrium, lost its rudder. And I think that we now have the prospect of greatly expanding the classical tradition, because now we have equilibrium concepts to combine with the process focus of classical economics. So, and indeed, a lot of studies showing how and why institutions matter. So, you learn the most from proving yourself wrong. Don't fear being wrong. And here's this book covers not only housing bubbles, but all of a summary of what I just talked about, all of those experiments. And it relates those experiments in the laboratory to main macroeconomic themes in the economy.
Thank you very much.
Now it's important, I have to remind myself to say this, it's important that the theorist needs that complete information, because otherwise he can't say anything precise about what prices are and how they're going to change when conditions change. The experimentalist needs that if he's going to do an experiment. He needs complete information to know what the price and quantity predictions are. But that doesn't necessarily mean or imply that the participants in the market have to have that information. And you see, Jevons was making the error of not having any model of the participant in the market. Rather, he had a model of the logic of how individuals, faceless individuals, would, because of their preferences and technology in the economy, would organize all that information into and allow specialization to yield an equilibrium. And this was what was taught and generally believed. And the reason why I was motivated to do an experiment was I finished in Harvard in 1955, and my first position was at Purdue University. And I taught in the fall of 1955 a principles class, and I realized I didn't know anything at all about the connection between the supply and demand theory and what individuals actually do on the ground. That wasn't part of my education. It wasn't part of anybody's education. Okay, then. And so we had these beliefs that people had to have complete information. So in my first experiment, I had, and I'll show you that experiment shortly. I had, so I resolved in the fall that in the first day of my class in January 1955, I would do an experiment. And I would do it with the people enrolled in that class the first day before they'd been contaminated by reading any economics. So I'd get them when they were very completely naive. And what I did was take half the individuals in that class, and I gave them each both identification number and a secret value that they could see. And they were buyers, okay, with little yellow cards. And their instruction was that we were going to have a market, and they would earn money and based on the difference between their value and the price they paid in the market. So they were motivated to buy low. The other half of the class got a little white card, identification number of each seller, and below it was their cost, the value to them for keeping the item. If the value, if they get a higher price, then they could benefit from selling it, and they would earn that as a profit, that difference between the price and that reservation value. And then, how are they going to trade? Well, I thought if there's anywhere in the world a competitive market, it's on the New York Stock Exchange or in the Chicago commodity pits, because those were famous, lots of information, and people knew about those markets. So I thought, well, I'm going to find out how they trade. So I went to the library and I got an old finance book called The Stock Market by Leffler. And that described the bid-ask double auction trading process. At the Post, the New York Stock Exchange, or the pits in the grain pits in Chicago. So I see what rules they're using. Notice that doesn't come from economics. Economists didn't know or pay any attention to those rules. Their idea of a market is where you go in and to a retail store and there's the price, take it or leave it. You see, well, plenty of those experiments followed this one I'm going to describe. But I was trying to give the theory, which I thought was going to have a lot of trouble, I was going to give it its best shot, okay? So buyers announce bids, sellers announce ask, contract prices occur when here's a bid and an ask. If a seller accepts this bid, we have a contract from some buyer, or if a buyer accepts this ask of some seller, you have a contract. So contracts come from either side. Well, I'll show you the results, which was much closer to the equilibrium, tended to converge than I expected. Now, here's the first experiment that I did, and it was in January 1955, and I just couldn't believe these results. Look how much room there is here for variation in contract prices, and you're not observing it. So I actually thought there must be something wrong with the experiment, and I realized there was something wrong with it. It was a flawed accident up here of too much symmetry. The average value, the average cost, is the same as the price. So I thought, well, let me change that. So here's a very asymmetric case that I did very soon after that. And notice it starts out well away from the equilibrium, but it tends to converge very quickly. I did this same experiment, but doubled the size of the market, each individual had 2 units rather than one. And the that thicker market tended to converge more rapidly. Now here is a recent experiment. These are high school students. And of course now we use these experiments mainly as part of the teaching tool. And these are high school students. It's an open outcry oral auction, but the teacher, the instructor has an assistant who's putting the bids and asks into the computer as they come in the order in which they come in, and they're plotted. So as people are trading in real time with an oral auction outcome, they're seeing these plots. So here's the first bid. A new bid has to be higher. Okay, here's a first ask. The next, a new ask has to be lower. You always, the conditions have to improve for the other side of the market. So the bid-ask spread has to converge. And then finally you have an acceptance and a contract. So this is the contracts in the order in which they occurred. And notice here that buyer B1 trades with a seller at a price of $6, and then 4 with 3 at $5.50, and so on. And then we show people the supply and demand, and they see now for the first time all the information that everyone else in the market has, as well as up to then they've only seen their own private information. So these, at least this institution, very rapidly, you see, aggregates that dispersed information. And notice it's 100% efficient, and that means that all these highest value buyers, the 12 highest value buyers, buy from the 12 lowest cost sellers. If this buyer here should get in and buy from this seller, then that buyer will displace, you see, a higher priced, higher valued buyer, and you'll have less than 100% efficient market. Now we do a lot of variations on this. For example, with the high school students, we might begin with this. And then, I don't have the chart for it, but they trade, and the bids rise, the asks rise, and there's no trade, and they wonder what's wrong. See. Well, this is what the pricing, one of the problems the pricing system has to solve. It has to determine not only the equilibrium price for a good, it has to determine those things that are not goods. Okay? And that takes, not everything is traded. The stones out there in the street are not traded, you see. So you've got to explain not only what's traded, but what's not traded. And also, so we do that, and then we do one like that, like this. That's the supply, and that's the demand. And of course, what does that do? It starts trading up here. And that one puzzles them too, until they see, you see the follow-up chart. So, that's a good that's not scarce. Well, the economy has to find out what's not scarce. Okay? That's not given free as information to people. Okay, all of this was inexplicable by, you know, what the state of our knowledge in the 1950s, and 60s. I want to point out, though, that it contrasts with Adam Smith's first axiom. I call it his axiom 1 in The Wealth of Nations, the propensity to barter and exchange. Economists and finance people are puzzled to this day why there's so much trading in stock markets. What are people doing? They can't explain that. People are trading all over the place, but they can't explain it. Okay? And, well, Adam Smith was not sure why people trade. But he looks out his window in Edinburgh and he sees people trading. If there's something that's happening you don't understand, it might be a candidate for an axiom. Okay? It's a primitive. And so he started with that. And in Adam Smith's story about markets, the important thing about exchange, an exchange is it leads to a price. As soon as there's a price out there, and it may be public, if it's not public, you hear about it through gossip. Gossip is far older than markets. Okay? And as soon as, once there's a price out there, you can start to make comparisons. And you can do calculations, all of those sorts of things that you really may not have, and comparisons that you wouldn't have thought of making. And in those comparisons, you learn to specialize. As soon as there's a price for corn and hogs, the farmer can ask, well, is it better for me to produce more hogs and less corn and get my corn from the market? Well, as soon as you start making those comparisons, you make adjustments, and what you're doing is discovering specialization. You don't have to know what it, imagine it or even think about it. You just have to have a process whereby you get there. Well, anyway, one of the first things, or early things that happened with the experiments we were doing, is that we started to think more in terms of process. We started to think, and it started to make more sense that those markets converged because people were always trying to improve. They compare the price with their value and the prices that. So early on, maybe you were a seller and you sold at a low price. Okay, you know your costs, and you see later prices rising in that market. So next period, you correct that behavior. You hold off, and prices tend to rise before you start selling. So people are in the process of doing that. And so with this process, you see economics started to become experimental, although initially what I was doing was not considered economics. A lot of economists were puzzled as to why I was doing it. So we began then to bury information, message contract procedures. We had sealed bid offer crosses that we looked at. We looked at posted offer pricing. Those markets, in terms of periods, tend to converge more slowly, but they still converge, okay? And they tend, since sellers have a high price bias, they tend to converge from above down to the equilibrium. Interesting that symmetric by supply and demand double auctions tend predominantly to converge from below. Symmetric. we're not surprised that this one converges from below, okay? But these tend to converge from below. I don't think we have a good explanation of that to this day. Buyers do better in these markets than sellers. And there's hardly a buyer in the world that doesn't think he's being screwed over by the sellers out there in the world. Everybody thinks sellers have an advantage, but the evidence indicates that buyers are perfectly well happy, take care of themselves very well. In an environment where we know what the values and costs are, so we know whether which side is doing better. Okay, we examined all these issues and also started to do applications to the design and testing of new markets. And the first, my first entry into that was in 1985. We did a study for the Arizona Corporation Commission. That's the commission that regulates electric power, gas, telephone, water, corporations to get a certificate to operate as a corporation in Arizona. They do that. And they wanted us to look at alternatives to what was called in the U.S. we call rate of return regulation. And under rate of return regulation, the utilities, when they build a new power plant, those have been done all over the world, including in very, very primitive remote societies that have almost no connection with markets. And then other less remote that have a little bit of connection with markets. There's almost a continuous gradation across the whole world of people. The ones that have no involvement in markets are disappearing, of course, over time. But the anthropologists were really surprised. They expected the more primitive societies to be more cooperative. They are less cooperative. They cooperate much less in the trust games than people that are also involved in markets. And I think Adam Smith has a comment in the Theory of Moral Sentiments that suggests that he wouldn't have been surprised by this. He said that it's hard to be generous if you have very little. If you're quite poor, it's very hard to be generous. And of course, that's what we're finding out there. Any other questions?
Yeah, Hi, Dr. Vernon. Thank you very much for coming to Ukraine and presenting your theory here. I have a question. What if you don't disallow to sell durables, but to limit and solve this bubbles problem, we introduce some period of time when we cannot sell what you bought? Okay, so you cannot sell exactly after you bought something durable, right? So, for example, I bought a house and I cannot sell it during 1 year. Or something like I have only limited period of time during the year when I can sell it. For example, I bought it in September, I can only sell it in September. Do you think this will somehow, deal with this problem of bubbles?
No, I think you're in danger of doing more harm than good because something unexpected happens to me after I buy a home and I have to resell it and get my equity out. I've been hit by some illness, I've been hit by some tragedy, or something has happened. And I think those one-size-fits-all solutions tend to create a lot of hardship, whereas even if they have some success, I think the answer is in basically when buying long-term, very durable, long-lived goods, people just have to have more skin in the game. See, traditionally, even before the Great Recession, we required, banks required 30% down, and then that eroded to 20% down, 15, 10, 5. And then the great innovation, the negative equity loan, where you got a loan and your payments were below, didn't even cover interest, okay? And so you incurred more liability until your payments started up. And people fresh into that kind of a loan, and the price of houses falls, and they're in negative equity very fast. Real big time negative equity. So I think, to me, that's the way to do it, but of course, the voters, the average voters, like easy credit, and so the politicians are going to go where the voters are. So it's easy to get an agreement to do these things which look good, that are good in the short run, but not good in the longer run.
So education apparently helps, right? The more educated people are, the less bubbles, am I right? So what about regulation on, those who enter the market? Would that do more harm than good?
Well,
In terms of education.
I'd like to try it before I fly it. Maybe get a county or a state or someone to try it out. One of the supposed advantages in the United States is that states can do their own experiments. We don't have to all do the same thing.
Well, this would really help with the stock market, right? Given that it's so international, not just national in size, but other markets.
Well, I'm less concerned about stock markets because they're volatile, but they don't cause recessions like houses do. I mean, for a long time it was thought that the 29 crash in the stock market was the cause, but I don't think there's any economic historians left that
Believes that.
that would argue that. I don't think that. And a reason and it's because they have more skin in the game. You see, with stocks, you have to put up 50% cash, and it's not a long-term loan. It's a call loan. When you sign with your broker for a margin account, that means you are giving your broker the right to make a call to you and say you have to put up more cash because your portfolio has fallen below, the margin requirements. And if you don't provide it, the broker is authorized to sell you out. So you're out of there. And if you look plots of stock market, like Standard & Poor's, going up and then falling, and you also plot credit to the market, it goes up like this, and when this falls, it falls. Credit to the stock market falls in step with prices. And that means there's no a balance sheet, negative equity balance sheet damage that accumulates. Those balance sheets are cleaned up day by day as you go down. So there's no carryover into the future to be a long-term drag on demand, the way people that are stuck in homes under negative equity, and they don't feel good that they owe, their income is $40,000 a year, and they owe $60,000 on their, the value of their home is $60,000 under the mortgage value. So they're $60,000 in a hole. Well, if the savings rate is 5% on a $40,000 income, and on average in the United States we save about 5%. That's $2,000 a year to reduce that $60,000. You see, you don't feel good about that. And I know people in the United States that are still not out of the negative equity, even though most are now. So the balance sheets are pretty well cleaned up now. household balance sheets in the United States should be. It's been 10 years, it's taken that long, and that's why I think there's reason to be optimistic about recovery.
Do you think, oh, sorry. Yes, am I? Okay. Do you think there is a bubble in education market in the United States? I mean, the inflation has been quite noticeable the past 20 years. I mean, anything textbooks, certain textbooks, and then since this
Well-
market is so driven by the
And it's
somebody
fueled-
else's money.
No, and it's fueled by other people's money.
Right.
And moreover, it shows you, you gave an example where you find signals in data.
Yeah.
And one of the signals is there's a good return on education.
Right.
Okay? So you want to get more people educated. And you expand loans and everything. Okay, more people are educated. That changes the data on which the original signal came. Because now all kinds of people are doing this and they're finding it harder to. Now, if the economy had continued to
Spence
grow,
has
it wouldn't be
global price
so
for that.
bad, but that's a, same thing happened in financial mortgage markets. People had all this incredible data on mortgages from the post-war period. Well, the data is all from banks doing due diligence on every borrower. Okay, they look at that data and they say, oh, all you really need is an estimate of the income and a credit score. And that explains, those two variables explain most of that variation. So then everybody started to just use those two variables. Guess what? The data changed. No one's doing due diligence anymore. Because it's much easier just to look at, why look carefully at every borrower when you see. And so, of course, the big reaction to that now is to tighten regulation on the banks. And well, Roman, you just bought a home and you found it incredibly difficult to get through the form because the banks are now having a huge number of requirements.
But is it a better thing or a worse thing?
Well, you know, the banks are pretty good at doing what it is that it takes to get the decision right. When they get it wrong, you let them go bankrupt. You know, the last thing in the world you want to do is what we did in the United States.
It's
You
been
see,
very
we
painful.
socialized the losses and privatized the profits.
Vernon, this has been a very painful experience for Ukraine. Just giving you some
Yeah.
background here.
Well, but bankruptcy is the way you clean up balance sheets and get started again.
That's right.
And if you don't do that, it's worse.
Even though it can be very painful.
Of course it's painful. My family lost their farm in 1933, not 1934. I am so happy that no one came and said, hey, you can stay in this farm. All you have to do is reduce your payments to 20% of what they were before. We would have been saddled for 25 years with debt. Negative equity. That's what we would have gotten instead of, you know, we lost it. It was lost already. Bank took over the thing, and I'll tell you, the bank took over a losing proposition also. A lot of the banks they weren't saved by taking over the property. Okay. So all of that got cleaned out. See, the way to avoid that is to not get there in the first place. Not try to paper it over with all kinds of bailouts.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
What can you say about a situation where, for example, information on the market is not spreading asymmetrically as it is usual in market, but absolutely symmetrical. So every customer has exact information about sellers, about all sellers, not only what are on the market, but about all. And all buyers, they give all information what they want to sell. will it influence, because internet gives this possibility, will that condition influence your theory and changes in your attitude to this?
Yes, well, in asset markets, we have perfect asymmetric information. Not enough. I am not impressed by the idea we're going to solve all these problems with transparency. Okay, there's too many crazy things people do, especially when it's with other people's money. Okay.
Okay. So just to give a round of applause to our guests.
We will have about 3. Oh, well, that has to be it. Thank you. Thank you. We will have 5 more minutes. If you want to buy a book, we still have 5 minutes, 3 minutes. Okay. If you want to buy a book, what's the price? 200 hryvnia. So we're more than happy to sign it, and we will. If you want to take a picture with Vernon, or we're here.
The rate base. There are hearings on that, and they approve the entry of that equipment. And if its cost is such that they need a higher price to get the accepted rate of return on that investment, then they put that in the price. So that means under American style regulation, the producers incur no risk at all. All the risk is on the consumer, you see, because if that plant is, if there was a cost overrun on it, it's nevertheless, the company gets its rate of return, and consumers just have to pay a higher price. So all the risk is borne by them. Now, did regulation in America originate as a consumer movement? No. No. It was companies that wanted to be regulated. And the reason is electric power, telephones, those were new industries at the turn of the century, and they were very profitable because this was a new product that people very much wanted. So there was a rush of entry, as there is in every new industry, a rush of entry. And as they came in, prices started to fall, profits started to decline, and the people in the industry lobbied their state legislatures for a different approach. And Sam Insull in electric power, Theodore Vail in telephones sold the states on the idea that consumers would benefit by investment stability of profits and everything. So that's how we got saddled with that. And it's like, you know what flypaper is? Flypaper, where the flies stick on it? Well, that's what this is. You can't get rid of it. You can't shake it off. It's very hard. The system is very much entrenched. We also did gas experiments in the gas industry, financed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Okay, now all of these markets so far that I've talked about are for non-durables. Why? Well, the moment you make a trade, if you're a buyer, you write your profits in. That's like eating a hamburger, and right away you eat it, and you've got the value. Okay, and the seller sold it, and he gets the value. Okay, so these are really, and notice that if you're a buyer, you're always a buyer. If you're a seller, you're always a seller. You don't change roles because of the price. Whereas in the stock market, if you go in and look at the prices and you were thinking you would buy, you decide, no, I'm going to sell. And if you go into the housing mortgage market, you buy a house and it appreciates in value in 30 or 35% in 3 years, you decide I'm going to sell it. So people are in there. Things that can be retraded are very different than the kinds of commodities here that I am talking about. Fortunately, these non-durables are by far the most important and largest part of the GDP. It's about over 2/3 of GDP. It's about 75% of private product. If you subtract government spending from GDP, think of that as private product. It's about 75%.